Back in 1967, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In looked like complete television insanity. Wild jokes, psychedelic chaos, and comedians laughing through every sketch. But away from the spotlight, several cast members were battling depression, addiction, financial ruin, and devastating health problems that slowly destroyed their lives behind the scenes. Join us as we uncover what really happened to them after 59 years. Dick Martin as co-host. Dick Martin, the goofy co-host constantly chasing women and acting clueless on screen, was actually the brilliant comic engine behind Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on January 30th, 1922, in Battle Creek, Michigan, Dick Martin was also 45 years old during the height of Laugh-In and became famous for playing the foolish, slow-witted half of the legendary comedy duo. Behind the scenes, however, Martin was widely respected as one of television's smartest comedy minds. Dick Martin died in 2008 at the age of 86 in Santa Monica, California, after suffering from chronic respiratory complications that severely weakened his health during his later years. Unlike many stars trapped forever by one successful role, Martin managed to reinvent himself after Laugh-In by becoming one of Hollywood's most successful sitcom directors. His work behind the camera on shows like The Bob Newhart Show and Family Ties earned him enormous respect throughout the television industry. Even with that success, Martin reportedly spent years fighting against the public perception that he was merely the goofy clown audiences saw on screen. The pressure to escape the shadow of Laugh-In pushed him to completely rebuild his career from the ground up as a director, proving he was far more intelligent and creative than viewers realized. By the final years of his life, worsening respiratory illness had slowly taken away the energy of the man once famous for making millions laugh. Still, Dick Martin ultimately succeeded in leaving Hollywood respected not just as a performer, but as one of the people who helped shape modern television comedy itself. Dan Rowan, as co-host. While everyone else on Laugh-In was screaming punchlines and acting completely insane, Dan Rowan usually stood there in a tuxedo, with a dry smile and calm one-liners like the only sane man in the room. Born on July 22, 1922, in Beggs, Oklahoma, Dan Rowan was 45 years old when Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In exploded into one of television's biggest comedy sensations and earned him major Emmy recognition. His composed style perfectly balanced the wild humor surrounding him and helped make the Rowan and Martin partnership legendary. Dan Rowan died in 1987 at the age of 65 after suffering from both lymphoma and severe complications related to type 1 diabetes. During the final years of his life, the illnesses caused intense physical suffering and gradually weakened him while his television career quietly faded from the spotlight. He spent much of his later life living far more privately and modestly in Florida after years as one of television's most recognizable faces. As his health deteriorated and public attention faded, Rowan reportedly became increasingly withdrawn while struggling emotionally with how quickly fame had disappeared after Laugh-In ended. The pressure of trying to preserve the legendary chemistry he once shared with Dick Martin reportedly weighed heavily on him as television opportunities slowly vanished. Combined with the constant physical pain caused by diabetes and cancer, his final years became both emotionally isolating and physically exhausting. In the end, he faced his final years in quiet suffering far away from the bright lights of television. Ruth Buzzy as Gladys Ormsby. Gladys Ormsby stomped around with a tight hairnet, angry face, and that famous handbag swinging at every creepy man who got too close on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on July 24, 1936, in Westerly, Rhode Island, Ruth Buzzy was 31 years old when the role transformed her into a national comedy icon and earned her a Golden Globe along with 5 Emmy nominations. The enormous success of Gladys later opened the door to decades of television appearances, voice acting, and comedy performances across Hollywood. Ruth Buzzy died on May 1, 2025. At the age of 88 at a nursing facility in Stephenville, Texas, after years of severe decline caused by Alzheimer's disease. Her condition became dramatically worse after multiple strokes in 2022 left her physically devastated and increasingly unable to communicate. Long before her death, Boozy had already stepped away from Hollywood completely, choosing instead to live quietly on a large Texas ranch while dedicating much of her time to charities supporting children and animals. As her health slowly collapsed, many fans were heartbroken watching one of television's brightest comedy legends disappear behind the cruelty of Alzheimer's. Friends close to Boozy described the disease as especially tragic because it gradually stole away the sharp humor, energy, and lively personality that had once made millions laugh. Even after leaving Hollywood fame behind willingly, her final years became painfully difficult as memory loss and repeated strokes slowly stripped away her independence. In the end, the woman who spent decades making audiences smile faced one of the cruelest endings in Hollywood. Gary Owens, as announcer. The Laugh-In announcer always read the show's most ridiculous jokes with a deep radio voice and deadly serious confidence, like he was reporting world-changing news on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on May 10, 1934, in Mitchell, South Dakota, Gary Owens was 34 years old during the rise of Laugh-In, and his legendary delivery carried him through more than 6 decades of non-stop work. Gary Owens died in 2015 at the age of 80, after years of severe complications caused by type 1 diabetes, a disease he had battled since childhood. Even during the final years of his life, Owens continued working relentlessly in voice acting and broadcasting, refusing to slow down despite worsening health problems caused by decades of exhausting schedules and non-stop performances. For many fans, his death felt like the loss of one of the last true golden age voices of American radio and television. But behind that energetic personality and polished voice, Owens spent most of his life quietly fighting physical exhaustion and constant health struggles. Living with diabetes since the age of 8 reportedly forced him into a lifetime of strict discipline while simultaneously pushing his body to dangerous limits through endless work. One of the biggest disappointments of his career also came when a bizarre children's program he passionately produced collapsed after being criticized as too strange and unsettling for audiences. Still, Gary Owens kept performing almost until the very end, staying loyal to the microphone that had defined nearly his entire life. Alan Sues as Big Al. Big Al always burst onto the screen acting wildly overexcited, talking nonsense with dramatic sports commentator energy and that wonderfully bizarre personality that made him one of the strangest characters on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on March 7, 1926, in Rossford, Ohio, Alan Sues was 42 years old during the height of Laugh-In and quickly became nationally famous for his eccentric comedy style. After leaving the show, he worked hard to prove he could handle darker and more serious roles on stage, especially through theatrical performances as villains like Professor Moriarty. Alan Sues died in 2011 at the age of 85 after suffering a sudden heart attack while watching television beside his beloved dog Doris at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. By the final years of his life, Hollywood had largely forgotten the comedian who once made millions laugh every week on television. He spent much of his later life quietly and privately, far removed from the spotlight that once surrounded him. That isolation became even more painful because Sues reportedly spent decades hiding parts of his personal identity during a time when Hollywood remained deeply judgmental toward people with different sexual orientations. After divorcing dancer Phyllis Gehrig in 1958, he chose to keep most later relationships extremely private, living cautiously to avoid public backlash that could damage his career. Even while audiences remembered Big Al as loud and outrageous, people close to Sues often described him as surprisingly lonely and emotionally guarded away from the cameras. In the end, one of television's most flamboyant comedy stars spent his final years in near-total silence and isolation. Lily Tomlin as Ernestine. Ernestine would grab the telephone, bully customers with that nasal voice, and act hilariously rude, like the most aggressive operator ever allowed near a switchboard on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on September 1st, 1939 in Detroit, Michigan, Lily Tomlin was 30 years old when characters like Ernestine and Edith Ann transformed her into one of America's biggest comedy stars. Her fearless humor and unforgettable characters later earned her an extraordinary career filled with Emmy, Grammy, and Tony victories across television, film, and theater. By 2026, Lily Tomlin is 86 years old and still actively working in Hollywood through acting, voice performances, and television appearances. Recent success from Grace and Frankie and 80 for Brady proved she remains one of the entertainment industry's most respected and enduring comedy legends. With an estimated net worth of around $20 million, Tomlin now lives a far more stable and fulfilled life alongside her longtime partner and wife, Jane Wagner. But the greatest struggle of Tomlin's life was never fame or money. It was the fear of losing her career if the truth about her private life became public. For more than 4 decades, she and Jane Wagner quietly hid their relationship while enduring constant rumors, media pressure, and the harsh realities of Hollywood's attitudes toward same-sex couples during earlier decades. Friends later revealed the secrecy often became emotionally exhausting, despite their deep love and loyalty to each other. In the end, Lily Tomlin not only survived those pressures, but lived long enough to openly celebrate the relationship she once feared could destroy everything she built. Henry Gibson as the Parson. The parson stood calmly with a polite smile while delivering dark little poems and savage jokes that somehow made the audience laugh and feel uncomfortable at the same time on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on September 21st, 1935 in Germantown, Pennsylvania, Henry Gibson was 32 years old when the role turned him into one of the show's sharpest and most unique comedians. His strange mix of innocent charm and biting satire later helped him earn critical praise in films like Nashville and The Blues Brothers. Henry Gibson died in 2009 at the age of 73 in Malibu, California, after a short battle with cancer. His health reportedly declined rapidly following exhausting chemotherapy treatments that left him physically weakened during the final months of his life. Tragically, his death came only 2 years after losing his wife Lois, whom he had been married to for more than 4 decades. That devastating personal loss reportedly changed Gibson completely during the final chapter of his life. Friends said the death of Lois left him emotionally shattered and struggling with overwhelming loneliness while trying to care for their 3 children through his own grief. Then, just as he was attempting to recover emotionally, he received the cancer diagnosis that would end his life. The man famous for making audiences laugh through dark humor eventually found himself facing real heartbreak and mortality far away from the comedy stage that once defined him. Goldie Hawn as regular performer. Goldie Hawn bounced across the Laugh-In stage with goofy dancing, giggling innocence, and that famous dumb blonde charm that audiences completely fell in love with on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on November 21st, 1945 in Washington, D.C., Goldie Hawn was only 23 years old when the show turned her into one of the biggest breakout stars of the late 1960s. Her popularity exploded almost immediately afterward, leading to Oscar-winning success. By 2026, Goldie Hawn is 80 years old and still occasionally appears in major film projects, including the Christmas Chronicles franchise. Away from acting, she spends much of her time leading the Hawn Foundation, focusing on emotional education programs for children around the world. With an estimated net worth of around $90 million, Hawn continues living a stable life alongside longtime partner Kurt Russell after more than 4 decades together without ever marrying. Still, that unconventional relationship brought years of criticism, gossip, and public judgment from people who viewed their refusal to marry as scandalous by Hollywood standards. Hawn also faced enormous pressure throughout her career from people who underestimated her intelligence because of the bubbly blonde image that first made her famous. Behind the laughter and cheerful personality, she spent decades fighting to be respected as both a serious actress and a capable businesswoman. Jo Anne Worley as regular performer. That enormous laugh, explosive energy, and wild, over-the-top reactions made Jo Anne Worley impossible to ignore whenever she appeared on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on September 6, 1937, in Lowell, Indiana, Jo Anne Worley was 30 years old during the height of Laugh-In, and quickly became famous for her loud, chaotic comedy style that perfectly matched the madness of the show. Her success later carried her into Broadway, television, and decades of voice acting work with Disney. By 2026, Jo Anne Worley is 88 years old and has officially retired from the entertainment industry after spending decades as one of television's most recognizable comedic personalities. Although she never built the glamorous Hollywood family life many expected, she devoted more than 40 years to animal rescue charities and organizations protecting abandoned pets. Away from cameras and celebrity culture, Worley chose a quieter life centered around compassion, privacy, and the animals she considered part of her family. Yet behind the non-stop laughter and energetic performances, Worley quietly carried deep personal loneliness throughout much of her adult life. After experiencing a painful failed marriage early in life, she never remarried and spent decades living alone without children while Hollywood continued moving around her. Friends often said her love for animals became both emotional comfort and a way to fill the emptiness left by isolation away from the stage. Even so, Jo Anne Worley transformed that loneliness into kindness, spending her later years helping abandoned animals instead of chasing fame that no longer mattered to her. Judy Carne as Sock It To Me Girl. Judy Carne would pop up smiling, laughing, and shouting, "Sock it to me," seconds before getting drenched, blasted, or humiliated in the craziest sketches on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on April 27, 1939 in Northampton, England, Judy Carne was 28 years old when the role made her one of the most recognizable comedy faces of late 1960s television. Judy Carne died in 2015 at the age of 76 in Northampton, England, after suffering from severe pneumonia. By the end of her life, her finances had collapsed so dramatically that reports estimated her remaining net worth at less than $200,000. After years of scandals and addiction destroyed her Hollywood career, Carne withdrew almost completely from public life and spent her later years living quietly in England far from the fame she once enjoyed. But the real tragedy of Judy Carne's life came from how brutally fast success turned into self-destruction. Struggling with addiction for years, she was repeatedly arrested on heroin-related charges during the 1980s, while her personal life spiraled into chaos. A devastating car accident later left her with serious injuries and legal problems that pushed her even further into emotional collapse. Carne eventually revealed many of those painful experiences inside a heartbreaking memoir that exposed the loneliness, addiction, and humiliation hiding behind her television fame. She later became one of Hollywood's saddest cautionary tales about fame and self-destruction. Dave Madden as Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte was played with constant frustration, sarcastic outbursts, and exhausted reactions that perfectly matched Dave Madden's dry comedic style on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on December 17, 1931, in Sarnia, Ontario, Canada, Dave Madden was 37 years old during his appearances on Laugh-In before later becoming famous as long-suffering manager Reuben Kincaid on The Partridge Family. His ability to mix irritation with comedy made him one of television's most memorable supporting actors of the era. Dave Madden died on January 16, 2014, at the age of 82 in Florida after suffering severe complications caused by myelodysplastic syndrome, a dangerous bone marrow disorder connected to blood cancer. During the final years of his life, worsening illness forced him away from acting while he relied on memoir writing and small radio voice work to maintain financial stability. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $1.5 million. As his health steadily declined, Madden was also carrying years of emotional exhaustion caused by career instability and personal heartbreak. His first marriage to Nana Adams collapsed after intense conflict and ended in a painful divorce that reportedly left him emotionally drained for years afterward. Although he later reunited with his high school love Sandy Martin and found some peace, the disappearance of major Hollywood opportunities continued to haunt him deeply as fame slowly faded away. In the end, the actor famous for portraying permanently stressed characters spent his real final years fighting constant physical pain, uncertainty, and the fear of being forgotten. Richard Dawson as the Vicar. The Vicar appeared with that sly smile, sarcastic wit, and mischievous charm that made Richard Dawson seem both charming and slightly dangerous at the same time on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on November 20th, 1932, in Gosport, England, Richard Dawson was 35 years old during his Laugh-In appearances before eventually becoming one of America's most famous game show hosts on Family Feud. His quick humor and confident personality later also helped him stand out as the sinister host in The Running Man. Richard Dawson died on June 2nd, 2012, at the age of 79 after suffering from complications related to esophageal cancer at UCLA Medical Center. During the final years of his life, the disease reportedly caused severe physical pain and dramatically weakened the once energetic television personality. At the time of his death, Dawson's estimated net worth stood at around $8 million following decades of television success. But behind the fame and charm, Dawson privately carried years of emotional conflict and professional tension. His first marriage to actress Diana Dors collapsed painfully in divorce, leading to complicated custody struggles that reportedly haunted him for years afterward. At the same time, many colleagues described Dawson as difficult, arrogant, and explosive behind the scenes, traits that slowly damaged relationships within the television industry and made networks increasingly cautious about working with him later in life. In the end, one of television's most charismatic personalities became equally remembered for both his enormous talent and the difficult personal battles hidden behind his smile. Larry Hovis as the Senator. The Senator always carried himself with loud confidence, exaggerated political arrogance, and the kind of smug attitude that made the character feel hilariously ridiculous on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on February 20th, 1936, in Wapato, Washington, Larry Hovis was 31 years old during his Laugh-In appearances and already recognized by audiences from Hogan's Heroes. His sharp comic timing and writing talent made him a familiar television face during the late 1960s and early 1970s. Larry Hovis died on September 9, 2003, at the age of 67 after battling late-stage esophageal cancer. By the final chapter of his life, his financial situation had deteriorated so badly that he was reportedly living under extremely difficult conditions while struggling with both illness and emotional collapse in Texas. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth had fallen to less than $300,000 after years away from major Hollywood success. As his career disappeared, Hovis reportedly found the emotional fall from television fame almost impossible to accept. Unable to secure meaningful acting work after Laugh-In and Hogan's Heroes ended, he left Hollywood entirely and turned to teaching acting at a university in Texas simply to survive financially. Then, the death of his wife Carol in 1995 shattered him emotionally and pushed him into deep depression just years before his cancer diagnosis arrived. By the end of his life, the comedian who once entertained millions was quietly fighting loneliness, illness, and financial ruin far away from the cameras that had once celebrated him. Barbara Sharma. As regular performer, Barbara Sharma lit up the Laugh-In stage with elegant dancing, bright smiles, and the kind of graceful energy that made even the show's craziest sketches feel glamorous on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on September 14, 1938, Barbara Sharma was 32 years old during the show's peak years and became known for the polished stage presence she had developed through years of dance training and live performances. By 2026, Barbara Sharma is 87 years old and lives a very private life far away from the entertainment industry. After the spotlight faded, she reportedly survived through small guest roles on shows like Frasier and Becker, along with minor commercial work, simply to maintain financial stability. Her estimated net worth today is believed to be around $800,000 after decades of inconsistent acting opportunities. That quiet disappearance from Hollywood reportedly became emotionally devastating for Sharma, as the industry slowly stopped calling. Rumors within entertainment circles claimed she struggled with severe depression and painful isolation after losing the fame and attention she once enjoyed during the Laugh-In years. Friends also suggested she felt deeply hurt by how quickly former colleagues and industry connections distanced themselves once her popularity faded. In the end, Barbara Sharma became another example of how brutally temporary television fame can be once the cameras stop rolling. Johnny Brown as sketch regular. Johnny Brown could switch from singing to wild comedy punchlines in seconds, bringing warm energy and fearless humor to the fast-moving sketches on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Born on June 11, 1937 in St. Petersburg, Florida, Johnny Brown was 33 years old when he joined the show in 1970 and became one of the first black performers to hold a regular spot on a major primetime comedy series. Johnny Brown died on March 2, 2022, at the age of 84 after suffering a sudden cardiac arrest in Los Angeles. Despite decades in television, Brown's later years became financially difficult as acting opportunities slowed and medical expenses increased while his health steadily declined. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $1 million, far smaller than many fans expected for such a recognizable television star. As his health worsened during his final years, Brown reportedly struggled with the painful reality that years of loyalty to contracts and television commitments had cost him larger film opportunities. He and producer George Schlatter also faced harsh resistance from network executives unwilling to give black performers permanent visibility on primetime television. Even through those struggles, Brown remained deeply devoted to his wife, June Brown, throughout their 59-year marriage. In the end, the comedian who helped break racial barriers on television spent his final years quietly battling illness and financial pressure far away from the applause that once surrounded him. So that was the cast of Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In after 59 years. And behind the wild jokes, crazy sketches, and non-stop laughter were lives filled with illness, loneliness, addiction, heartbreak, and painful struggles that fans never imagined. Which cast member shocked you the most today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more incredible then and now stories from classic television legends.